Welcome to GreenChat episode 4. Today we have an interesting set of target discussions focusing on clean energy and how to decarbonize the energy sector. Energy includes electricity, and we're going to dive into how much of energy is electricity and how much is not, etc. today, and also focus more on what are all the ways to generate, what options are available to decarbonize from a generation standpoint. And also, we should look at many of these sources which are intermittent. So, we need to look at storage as an option. And that's what we'll dive in today. Look at what are the options available for generation and storage. Welcome. My name is Narasimhan. And here with me is Dr. Hiran Vedam, who will be leading us through the generation, what options are available right now. Also joining us in a guest appearance role is Dr. Shivakumar Kalyanaraman. We'll talk more about him in episode 5, but he's going to give a cameo appearance in episode 4 as well. Go ahead, Hiran.
Thank you, Max. Hello, everyone. So, as we learned in our high school physics, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. So, we can only convert it from one form to another. And the primary source of energy for all of us is the sunlight that comes in, either that came in long back or what comes in on a daily basis. So, this primary energy is stored as fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, or in terms of geothermal energy, or you can use the solar energy that's coming in directly in terms of plants and so on. So these are the various forms of primary energy sources. But we cannot use them directly. So we need to convert them, we need to extract them and use them in some way. And that's where the energy carriers or the secondary sources of energy that we are more familiar with, like petrol, diesel, natural gas, or electricity. And we can either store these and use them later, or we can transmit them, and we can use them for a variety of to meet the variety of energy needs, from heating to transportation to powering all our devices and so on. So if you look at how this energy is distributed, 80% of the energy we use today comes from fossil fuels, and we touched upon it. We discussed it a lot in episode 2, and 6% of it is from biomass, directly the agricultural waste or plant waste and so on. And the rest of it, very small portion of it, comes from solar and wind currently, but we hope this will grow for various reasons that will become apparent in this session as we go along. And when we talk of energy, most people think about electricity, and most of the discussion around energy is around electricity, its transmission, its use, and so on. But it only contributes to 43% of our energy needs. The rest is, gases, liquids, and solids like coal, gas, and oil, and also hydrogen kind of gases that we can store the primary energy and use it for later. And because it's easier to transport over pipelines, or we can store it for a long time without degradation and so on.
That was good, Hiran. What is the current and future demand of energy?
If you look at the demand side of things, transportation, which includes your road, rail, your aviation, your seafaring vehicles, that accounts for about 22% of our energy use. Building sector, including our traditional cooking, space heating, and all of that, accounts for 45%. And the industry, including your waste treatment and all of that, accounts for 32% of it. So this is how the energy industry is structured overall. And if you look at the primary consumption of energy world over, we are close to about 160 petawatt hours of energy that we use today. But it is expected to grow as GDP grows in line with it. We expect it to grow, at the 3 to 5% rate that we are seeing today.
Wonderful, Hiran. It's interesting to see that only 43% of energy is from electricity, and that's a big know-how that we have learned today. Now let's focus a little bit on how what are the losses that are involved in every stage. You've mentioned all these phases. I'm sure there's energy losses across every phase. Let's talk about that.
Sure. As we all know, energy, we need to convert energy from one form to another to use it. And if we transmit energy from one point to another, So at every stage, when we are converting from primary to secondary, or whether you're transmitting it, or whether you're using it in a device, at each stage there are losses, inefficiencies in terms of transmission or transformation or in usage. So, for example, if we take, coal, 1 unit of energy in coal, when it translates into the light in your light bulb, only 1.6% of that energy is actually generating that light. Everything else is lost either in transmission or in the, in heating the bulb, so to speak. So the useful energy is only 1.6%.
That's
And not
extremely
only
low.
that, yes, and not only that, I mean, if you look at the transmission losses, it accounts for more than 50% of the electricity generated. So you take coal, you convert it into electricity in your power plant. By the time it reaches your home, 50% of that energy is already lost.
So if you look at the technical loss versus commercial loss, I think you're including the commercial loss on this. The technical
Yeah.
loss would be around 3.5-4% only, but the commercial loss is much higher. I agree with you.
Right.
And is that an India phenomenon?
No, this greater than 50% is actually, a number from the global data from IEA. So this is not just a India phenomenon. You see that everywhere.
Oh, okay. I was under the impression that 50% included the first set of losses primarily.
So 50% is a big number. Yeah.
And which is where, I guess we'll be talking more about it in episode 5.
Now, given the different choices of energy generation, what are some of the factors to consider?
Now that we have so many different options for energy and energy generation, the next question becomes, how do we pick the right one? So one of the factors that we can look at is known as the capacity factor. It determines, it shows like how efficiently we are using the energy source. It depends on the duration of operation, the availability of raw materials, and also the capacity of the grid to take the energy that's being generated. So if the grid can take more, so for example, you have intermittent sources like solar and wind, when they come online, you may not have the demand. And if the grid doesn't have enough capacity, then you have to shut down those plants. And this leads to lower capacity factors for wind and solar compared to nuclear that can run 24/7 because it doesn't require any new raw material to be added on a daily basis, and it can run continuously without interruption.
Correct. I think this is an area that we'll delve much more deeper in episode 5, along with our colleague, Dr. Shivakumar Kalyanaraman. So let's proceed to the next slide, where we're going to talk about more on safety aspect as well as the cleanliness aspect of the various sources.
If you look at, the another way to compare the different energy generation options is to say, okay, is it safe? How much greenhouse gas emissions do they produce per terawatt or kilowatt or whatever measure you want to make? And you see that most renewable energy sources like solar, wind, hydropower, even biomass have much lower greenhouse gas emissions, and they're much safer compared to traditional sources like coal and oil especially. So this means that if you want to reach the net zero targets from a carbon climate change perspective, and if you want to keep the workforce safe, then it's better to go with renewable sources rather than the traditional fossil fuel based sources.
Makes sense. The greenhouse emissions rate you're showing is for the EU. What about the rest of the world? Won't it be very different?
Greenhouse gas emissions isn't actually the same in every part of the world, because you may have to, depending on where the units are being manufactured, where the energy is being produced, where the raw materials are coming in, and so on. There is a significant variation in the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for each of these technologies. But even considering that, on an average, you will see the renewable sources having much lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to the traditional sources.
Yeah, so basically you've got the transportation costs, you've got cost of production depending on where it's being produced. Hence, you've got pollution that's coming in because of transportation as well. adding to the greenhouse gases, etc.
Right. How you're transporting it, whether you're using electric vehicles to transport it, or whether you're using, traditional ICE-based vehicles to transport it, all of this matters. So moving on, the other way to look at, compare these energy sources is to look at the efficiencies. Large hydro plants are very efficient in generating electricity because you can take all the energy, that's the potential energy from the water that's coming in, and convert it to electricity, most of it anyway. Large hydroelectricity projects have large negative externalities in terms of the environmental consequences, in terms of the social consequences. On the other hand, solar photovoltaics have much lower efficiencies. Now, I mean, the best efficiencies are what, Max, around 20 to 25% efficiency?
We're at 25%. Cell efficiency around 26%, and module efficiency around 22%.
Yeah, so around that kind of efficiency, but these are they don't have so many negative externalities compared to the hydroelectric projects, right?
So with so many actors, how do we do an apples to apples comparison?
Putting it all together, I mean, we need some way to kind of put them all together, right? And that's where the industry uses something called the levelized cost of electricity. So this takes into consideration your efficiency of conversion, your capex, your opex, all the other factors, your capacity utilization, all of these, and gives you a range of numbers as to what would it cost per unit of electricity generated using this technology, using the various options we've been looking at. And it varies widely because it is based on where it is located, how it is being used, and so on.
Yeah, it makes sense. The levelized cost of electricity takes into account not just the upfront cost, but also the operational cost of running the power plant over time, right? And also, I am not sure if it takes into account the recycling cost towards the end. It needs to, but those are some things that needs to be updated.
Right. Yeah, I think currently they don't. We have to include them.
So, so I think that's a lot of discussion on the generation side. And now let's look at, we have intermittent sources now. It's clear that solar is at 25%, wind is at 30%. If you want to, pump in more solar and wind into the grid, what we need to do is also couple them with storage. So let's look at a few storage options from a technology standpoint, and what, how do we kind of measure one versus the other?
Yeah, sure. So there are a wide variety of energy storage technologies. Some of these we know and we have used for a very long time. Some of them are newer, like flywheels and pumped hydro. To an extent, we have used. I mean, the large hydro dams are all gravity-based systems. But now we are looking at much smaller scale systems. Then you have the electrochemical based storages, a variety of battery technologies or flow batteries. You can store it as a hydrogen. You can convert the electricity generated into hydrogen using PEM electrolyzer or an alkaline electrolyzer, and store the hydrogen. And once you convert it, hydrogen can be stored for as long as you want without any degradation. And that's the biggest advantage of something like hydrogen, because if you store energy in a battery, we know over time, that you lose that energy that is stored.
Yeah.
Then you have super caps that you can use for short-term small storage of smaller quantities of energy, or you can use thermal. I mean, you don't always need to store energy in the form of electricity. You can store it directly as heat or as high pressure systems that can release the energy when you need it. Or gravity based, you can have these concrete blocks that you can raise up and store the energy, convert the energy into potential energy that you can use. So all these options are available. The question becomes, what's appropriate when?
Yeah. So if you look at it, right, so we've got all, it's not a one size fits all. So that's what I think we should talk about next. Talk about which fits better in what sort of environment.
Right. So if we, now we've seen that we have a variety of options. So which one do you pick? And it really depends on what is the power rating of the system we are talking about, and how long do you want to store it, and how fast you want to access that energy. Okay, so if you're talking about something like a pumped hydro or compressed air storage, it would take you hours to kind of get that energy back when you need to use it. If you're using super caps, you can quickly get that energy back, the energy you need from the storage. Okay, lithium ion or lead acid batteries, flow batteries, these have different time scales and a range of them. But these are really ideal. Lithium ion batteries are really ideal for smaller scale, like single megawatt kind of range. But if you need even higher capacity, then you go for something like a flow battery or hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen based storage, and so on. Another factor that contributes, in addition to the time of discharge and the amount of power, is the round trip efficiencies. Okay, how much, we said that every time there is an energy conversion, there is some loss. And what is the round trip efficiency you can get from generation to storage and back when you need it? And these vary from as high as 85% for pumped hydro to the low below 50% for hydrogen, and other technologies being somewhere in between.
So we've got a variety now of storage options that we can evaluate based on maximum power rating, discharge time, how many cycles you can use, what is the lifetime, what is the charge density or the energy density, and what is the efficiency of the conversion back and forth, right? So using these, we can make intelligent choices. Maybe it leads to some more optimization on which technology is being used for what applications and where, at what price points. So now we should also talk about the price, which is also an important, as you're saying solar is very cheap, but then when you add storage to it, it becomes more expensive. So maybe we should talk about some kind of a cost value for these various options and evaluate it on a levelized cost kind of basis. Go ahead.
Right. So similar to what we've done with the levelized cost of electricity, or we can also do a levelized cost of storage. And again, depending on which point you're using the storage for, what kind of capacity you're using it for, there is a range. And one thing to note is that the same LFP battery storage may have a different levelized cost of storage when you're using it for wholesale storage versus in transmission and distribution,
Correct.
or in your commercial or industrial scale, because the way they scale is not always linear.
Correct. It's economies of scale, right? So you and packaging costs, etc., will be different depending on a megawatt scale plant versus a 10 kilowatt or a 50 kilowatt plant.
Right. So none of these kind of scale linearly, and there are some fixed costs each one comes with. So that's why same technology will have different costs depending on where you're using it, which application you're putting it for.
Hiran, in terms of different applications, the same battery costs differently. Maybe it's also interesting to mention that these costs also are not fixed over time, right? So they tend to trend downwards,
Right.
and some of them fall faster based on learning curves and deployment. Would you like to
Correct.
comment on that?
Right. In fact, storage costs as well as solar, the renewable energy costs have been coming down over the years. Now, if you compare, solar versus traditional energy sources, solar and wind are cost competitive for most of the applications. Similarly, storage costs were very high earlier, but they are coming down rapidly, partly because of the gigafactories that industry has been building for electric vehicle purposes, but the economies of scale are coming in. But recently there is some change in it because of the geopolitical situation. But we do expect that over the long term, the cost of storage will come down, right, and rapidly.
Could you also comment about which of these materials are rarer or more abundant, as well as where does inflation or long-run commodity inflation, as opposed to shorter-term things, affect the long-term costs?
So, I mean, if you look at the NMC batteries that are used for storage, I mean, at least for stationary, people seem to prefer the lithium iron phosphate solution over the NMC batteries. But let's stick with, if you look at NMC, the cobalt component has always been high, and it is high. But lithium has been going up recently because of the demand, and also because of the war in Ukraine and associated supply chain constraints, and also the time it takes for new lithium mining to happen is also constraining some of that. But I mean, we have adequate supply of lithium, so we don't. I mean, over long term, that doesn't seem to be a constraining factor. Um, and people are looking at various alternative chemistries like sodium ion batteries and so on. And these could make it cheaper. But I mean, every new battery technology takes a long time to come to market. And generally, people tend to underestimate how long it takes for a new battery technology to come into the market and scale. And that's where some of these these newer technologies will take time.
Yeah, and just to add a couple of points on it, right? One of the key areas of storage is, as Hiran pointed out, not just in batteries, but as hydrogen. And that can be heavily localized. Other than the membrane itself, a lot of the components can be localized, right? Even the membrane, India could make this eventually. But the key is, if you have existing pipelines that are being used for natural gas, etc., and the same pipeline can be used up to 4% for hydrogen as well, and that mix is improving the natural gas yield, and there's a lot of improvements that are happening in that area. So we should not forget other localizable methods of storage, right? That way you can maintain Atmanirbhar, maintain the inflation, as Shiv pointed out, inflation ready solutions that don't pinch the pocket. So fantastic. I think we've come to a logical end for episode 4, where we talked about the generation and storage aspects of energy, mostly electricity, 43% of which was electricity that we learned. In the next episode, in episode 5, we will delve a little bit more deeper into the supply chain aspects of energy, primarily the supply and demand, the mismatch, etc. Thank you very much for your time, for listening in, and do chime in for episode 5 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please don't forget to give us all your feedback.
And it's also useful to know that Professor Arvind and others in IIT Madras are working on these new technologies.